The Letter of Aristeas. A trustworthy narrative has been compiled, Philocrates, of the meeting which we had with Eleazar, high priest of the Jews, arising out of your attaching great importance to hearing a personal account of our mission, its contents and purpose. By detailing each aspect, I have tried to give you a clear exposition of it, realizing your scholarly disposition, which is a supreme quality in any man who has tried continually to increase his learning and understanding, whether from the accounts of others or by actual experience. This is the way in which a pure disposition of mind is acquired, by the attainment of the noblest ends, and which, turning to piety, the highest of all ends, lives by adopting a rule which does not err. We have a set purpose devoted to the special study of the things of God, and offered ourselves as a deputation to the aforesaid gentleman, whose integrity and reputation have won him preeminent honor in the eyes of citizens and others alike, and who has gained a very great benefit for his own circle and for fellow citizens in other places. Our deputation waited upon him, with a view to the translation of the divine law, due to its being written by them on parchments in Hebrew characters. We undertook this task with enthusiasm, seizing an opportunity with the king in connection with those who were transported to Egypt from Judea by the king his father, who was the original founder of the city and took over the government of Egypt. It is worthwhile telling you this as well, for I am convinced that because you are more favorably inclined toward the piety and disposition of those who live by the sacred law, concerning whom we propose to write, you will gladly listen, since you have paid a special visit to us from your island, and wish to hear with us of matters pertaining to the edification of the soul. I had previously sent you the account of what I regarded as the most memorable matters. We received this account of the people of the Jews from the most renowned high priest in renowned Egypt. You are studiously disposed toward what can help the mind, and it is my duty to share this with all like-minded persons, and all the more so with you, for you have a kindred spirit, being not only a blood brother in character, but also in the pursuit of beauty, the same as we are. The value of gold or any other treasure among those highly prized by the empty-headed does not possess the same value as compared with the pursuit of culture and caring for these things. But lest we prolong the introduction and indulge in idle chatter, we will proceed to the main part of the narrative. On his appointment as keeper of the king's library, Demetrius of Phalerum undertook many different negotiations aimed at collecting, if possible, all the books in the world. By purchase and translation he brought to a successful conclusion, as far as lay in his power, the king's plan. We were present when the question was put to him, "How many thousand books are in there in the royal library?" His reply was, "Over 200,000. O king, I shall take urgent steps to increase in a short time the total to 500,000. Information has reached me that the law books of the Jews are worth translation and inclusion in your royal library." "But where is there to prevent you from doing this?" he said. "Everything for your needs has been put at your disposal." Demetrius replied, "Translation is needed. They use letters characteristic of the language of the Jews, just as Egyptians use the formation of their letters in accordance with their own language. The Jews are supposed to use Syrian language, but this is not so, for it is another form of language." The king, in answer to each point, gave orders that a letter be written to the high priest of the Jews, that the aforementioned project might be carried out. I considered that it was an opportunity in connection with the matters on which I had often asked Sosebus of Tarentum and Andreas, the chief bodyguards, concerning the release of those deported from Judea by the father of the king. He invaded the whole of Cilicia and Phoenicia, and by a combination of success and bravery deported some and took others prisoners, bringing everything into subjection by fear. In the course of this he removed from the land of the Jews into Egypt up to 100,000 people, from whom he armed about 30,000 chosen men, and settled them throughout the land in the forts. Already in earlier times as well a fair number had entered the country with the Persian, and before them other confederate troops had been dispatched to fight with Psammeticus against the king of the Ethiopians, but they were not so many in number as those brought over by Ptolemy the son of Lagos. As we said previously, he selected the best, outstanding in youth and strength, and armed them. The remaining number, old men, children, and women also, he let go into slavery, not so much out of any personal predilection for such a course, but because he was prevailed upon by his troops on account of the services which they had given in the trials of war. When therefore we came upon some opportunity for their release, as we have shown before, we spoke concerning the following words to the king. Let it never be unreasonable to be refuted by events themselves, O king. The laws have been established for all the Jews, and it is our plan not only to translate but also to interpret them. But what justification shall we have for our mission, as long as large numbers are in subjection in your kingdom? But out of your unsullied and magnanimous soul, release those who are subject to misery. The same God who appointed them their law prospers your kingdom, as I have been at pains to show. These people worship God, the overseer and creator of all, whom all men worship, including ourselves, O king, except that we have a different name. Their name for him is Zeus and Jove. The primitive men, consistently with this, demonstrated that the one by whom all live and are created is the master and lord of all. In your excelling all men by your nobility of soul, I beg you to release those held in slavery. He wasted no time, while we offered hearty prayer to God to dispose his mind to the release of them all. Mankind is God's creation, and is changed and converted by him. Wherefore, with many diverse prayers, I besought the Lord with all my heart that he might be prevailed upon to accomplish my request. For I had great hope, as I presented the case for the saving of men, that God would execute the fulfillment of my requests, inasmuch as whatsoever men think to do in piety, in the way of righteousness and attention to good works, let the Lord God of all direct their acts and intentions. The king looked up, and looking on me with gracious countenance, said, How many thousand do you consider there will be? Andreas, standing by, answered, A little more than 100,000, he said. It is a small request that Aristeas makes of us. Sosibus and some of those present thus said, It is worthy of your magnanimity to offer the release of these men as a thank offering to the Most High God. You are highly honored by the Lord of all, and have been glorified beyond your ancestors. So, if you make even the greatest thank offering, it benefits you. The king was absolutely confounded, and ordered an increase in army pay, and a payment of 20 drachmas for each slave, together with the publication of an edict on these matters, and the compilation of a register accordingly. He exercised his zeal on a grand scale, God having fulfilled all our purpose, and compelled him to release not only those who came into his kingdom with his father's army, but also any others who were there previously, or were subsequently taken there. They revealed that the gift amounted to more than 400 talents. As regards the copy of the decree, I consider its recording to be of no small value, because the generosity of the king will be more clearly manifested thereby, as God gives him strength to bring salvation to large multitudes. It was as follows. By order of the king, as many as joined our fathers' campaigns in the region of Syria and Phoenicia, and in their advance into the territory of the Jews became masters of Jewish personnel, which they transported into the city or the country, or sold to others, and likewise any such who were there before the advance or were subsequently brought in, those who hold such persons shall forthwith release them, receiving as the price for each individual 20 drachmas, such money to be paid in the case of soldiers with the issue of their pay, and in the case of the remainder from the royal treasury. It is our opinion that these prisoners were taken contrary to the wishes of our father in a manner quite improper, and that excessively drastic military action caused the destruction of their land and the transportation of the Jews into Egypt. The assistance from the soldiers given along the plain was quite enough, and the enslavement of these men is accordingly entirely inequitable. We have a reputation of dispensing justice to all men, and all the more to those who are enslaved without good reason. Our overall aim is that which promotes justice and piety in all things. We have accordingly decreed that all Jewish personnel in slavery everywhere in the kingdom for whatever reason shall be released, their owners to receive the payment laid down above, and that no one shall deal in a slow manner in these matters. 3 days from the day of publication of this decree, the owner shall furnish registers to those appointed over these matters, giving immediately details of these persons. We have concluded that it is in the interest of ourselves and our royal affairs that this matter shall be accomplished. Anyone who so wishes may give information concerning those who have disobeyed this edict, on the understanding that he will assume the office of the accused if found guilty. The possessions of such men shall be appropriated into the royal treasury. This decree was submitted to the king for his perusal. It was identical in all other respects except for the clause, and likewise any such who were there before the advance or were subsequently brought in, which the king added with his own hand, showing his magnificent magnanimity. He gave orders also that a generous gift of expenses should be divided among the servants of the troops and the royal bankers. Once so decided, it was implemented in 7 days. The gift amounted to more than 660 talents. A large number of children at the breast were also set free with their mothers. There was an additional proposal to the effect that 20 drachmas should be given for these, and the king commanded that this also should be done, thus completely accomplishing every detail of his policy. When this had been completed, he commanded Demetrius to report on the copying of the Jewish books. All measures were taken by these kings by means of edicts and in complete safety, with no trace of negligence or carelessness. For this reason I have set down the copies of the report and of the letters, as well as the number of those returned and the state of each, because each of them was outstanding and magnificent. The copy of the memorandum is as follows. To the great king from Demetrius, your command, O king, concerned the collection of missing volumes needed to complete the library, and of items which accidentally fell short of the requisite condition. I have highest priority and attention to these matters, and now make the following further report. Scrolls of the law of the Jews, together with a few others, are missing from the library, for these works are written in Hebrew characters and language, but they have been transcribed somewhat carelessly and not as they should be, according to the report of the experts, because they have not received royal patronage. These books also must be in your library in an accurate version, because this legislation, as could be expected from its divine nature, is very philosophical and genuine. Writers, therefore, and poets in the whole army of historians have been reluctant to refer to the aforementioned books, and to the men past and present who featured largely in them, because the consideration of them is sacred and hallowed, as Hecatus of Abdera says, If you approve, O king, a letter shall be written to the high priest at Jerusalem, asking him to dispatch men of the most exemplary lives and mature experience, skilled in matters pertaining to their law, 6 in number from each tribe, in order that, after the examination of the text agreed by the majority, the achievement of accuracy in the translation, we may produce an outstanding version in a manner worthy both of the content and of your purpose. Farewell always. On receiving this report, the king ordered a letter to be written to Eleazar regarding these matters, announcing also the actual release of the prisoners. He made them a gift also for the provision of cups and goblets, and a table and libation vessels weighing 50 talents of gold, 70 talents of silver, and a goodly number of precious stones. He commanded the treasurers to allow the craftsmen to select whatever they might prefer, and of currency for sacrifices and other requirements 100 talents. We will show you details of the provisions after we have given the copies of the letters. The letter of the king was of the following pattern. King Ptolemy to Eleazar the high priest, hearty greetings. It is a fact that a large number of the Jews settled in our country after being uprooted from Jerusalem by the Persians during the time of their ascendancy, and also came with our father into Egypt as prisoners. He put many of them into the military forces on generous pay, And in the same way, having judged the veterans to be trustworthy, he set up establishments which he handed over to them, to prevent the Egyptian people feeling any apprehension on their account. Having now inherited the throne, we adopt a more liberal attitude to all our subjects, and more especially to your citizens. We have freed more than 100,000 prisoners, paying to their captors the price in silver proportionate to their rank. We also make amends for any damage caused by mob violence. We decided to do this as a religious obligation, making of it a thank offering to the Most High God, who has preserved the kingdom for us in peace and highest renown throughout the whole world. Those at the peak of their youth we have appointed to the army, and those who are able to be at our court, being worthy of confidence in our household, we have put in charge of some ministries. It is our wish to grant favors to them and to all Jews throughout the world, including future generations. We have accordingly decided that your law shall be translated into Greek letters from what you call the Hebrew letters, in order that they too shall take their place with us in our library and the other royal books. You will therefore act well and in a manner worthy of our zeal by selecting elders of exemplary lives with experience of the law and ability to translate it, 6 from each tribe, so that an agreed version may be found from the large majority, in view of the great importance of the matters under consideration. We believe that the completion of this project will win us high reputation. We have dispatched on this business Andrea of the chief bodyguards and Aristeas, men held in high esteem by you, to confer with you. They bring with them first fruits of offerings for the temple and 100 talents of silver for sacrifices and the other requirements. Write to us on any matters you wish, and your requests will be gratified. You will be performing also an act worthy of friendship, for what you choose will be carried out with all dispatch. Farewell. In reply to this letter, Eleazar wrote an acceptance as follows. Eleazar, the high priest to King Ptolemy, dear friend, greeting. Good health to you and to Queen Arsinoe, your sister, and to your children. If that is so, it would be well, and as we wish. We too are in good health. On receipt of your letter, we rejoiced greatly because of your purpose and noble plan. We therefore collected together the whole multitude and read it to them, that they might know your piety toward our God. We also showed them the vessels which you sent, 20 of silver and 30 of gold, 5 cups and a table for offering. And for the performance of the sacrifices and the furnishing of the temple requirements, 100 talents of silver, brought by 2 men highly esteemed by you, Andreas and Aristeas, gentlemen of integrity, outstanding in education, worthy in every respect of your conduct and justice. They also communicated to us your messages, in reply to which they have heard from us also sentiments consistent with what you wrote. Everything which is to your advantage, even if it is unnatural, we will carry out. This is a sign of friendship and love. You have also bestowed great unexpected benefits upon our citizens in many ways. We therefore offered sacrifices without delay for you, your sister, your children, and your friends. The whole multitude made supplication that it should come to pass for you entirely as you desire, and that God, the ruler of all, should preserve your kingdom in peace and glory, and that the translation of the sacred law should come to pass in a manner expedient to you and in safety. In the presence of the whole assembly we selected elders, honorable men, and true, 6 from each tribe, whom we have sent with the law in their possession. It will be a noble deed, O righteous king, if you command that once the translation of the books is complete, these men be restored to us again in safety. Farewell. The names of the men are as followed. First tribe, Joseph, Ezekiah, Zechariah, John, Ezekiah, and Eliseus. Second tribe, Judas, Simon, Samuel, Adaias, Mattathias, and Esclamias. Third tribe, Nehemiah, Joseph, Theodosius, Baseas, Ornias, and Dachis. Fourth tribe, Jonathan, Abrias, Eliseus, Ananias, and Chabrais. Fifth tribe, Isaac, Jacob, Jesus, Zebedæus, Simon, Levi. 6th tribe, Judas, Joseph, Simon, Zechariah, Samael, and Selemiah. 7th tribe, Zebedæus, Zedekiah, Jacob, Isaac, Jesaias, Nathanias. 8th tribe, Theodosius, Jason, Jesus, Theodotus, John, and Jonathan. 9th tribe, Theophilus, Abram, Arsam, Jason, Indemias, and Daniel. 10th tribe, Jeremiah, Eleazar, Zechariah, Baneas, Eliseus, and Dathias. 11th tribe, Samuel, Joseph, Judas, Jonathan, Shabbeu, and Dositheus. 12th tribe, Isael, John, Theodosius, Arsamus, Abietes, and Ezekiel. 72 in all. The matters relating to the king's letter received the aforementioned reply from Eleazar and his advisers. Since I promised to give full details of the furnishings, I will now do so. The finished objects were conspicuous for their variety of craftsmanship. The king made a generous contribution and oversaw the craftsmen in each case, so that they could not neglect anything or finish it off thoughtlessly. First, I will describe the details of the table. The king's main plan was to make the furnishing an object outstanding in its measurements, and commanded inquiries to be made of the local people concerning the size of the precious one set up in the temple at Jerusalem. When they gave him the measurements, he asked a further question, whether he should make it larger. Some of the priests and the others said that there was nothing to prevent this. The king replied that though he was quite willing to make it even 5 times as large in size, he hesitated in case it proved to be useless for the services. He not only chose, he said, that his gift should be placed in that building, but would be much more pleased if the appointed ministers duly performed the appropriate rites upon the furnishings which he had provided. Lack of money was not the reason he made the measurements of the previously completed offering short. But it is plain, he said, for what reason they were so constituted in their measurements. Had there been any precise order to that effect, there should be nothing lacking now. Accordingly, we must not transgress nor overstep what is right and proper. He commanded that the fullest use should be made of the variety of the arts, his intentions being pious in every respect, and having naturally a good eye for appreciating how things will look. In cases of unspecified items, he commanded that they should make them with an eye to their beauty, not expense. In cases of specified items, measurements should tally with them. Their finished work was 2 cubits in length, 1.5 in height. They made it solid all over with highly precious gold, by which I mean not just an outer covering of gold, but the plate itself superimposed. They made the crown a palm's radius in size, the moldings twined, with coiled work in low relief. The relief work marvelously executed on 3 sides. It formed a triangle. On each side the shape of the workmanship was identical in arrangement, so that whichever side it was turned, the appearance was identical. And when one side of the crown was placed downward, the slope downward to the surface of the table kept its beautiful shape, and the outer slope was facing the view of anyone approaching it. So the prominence of the 2 sloping sides stood out sharply, being raised high, as we have said, and of triangular construction. Whichever side it was turned, there were arrangements of precious stones upon it, between the patterns of lines. Each overlapped the other, unsurpassed in craftsmanship. They were all fastened through the holes with golden pins for safety. At the corners the clasps closed to keep them together. On the sides, on the crown, all round, as one looked at the top of an ovate border had been fashioned, set with precious stones, in prominent relief, with uninterrupted striped reliefs, closely connected with each other around the whole of the table. Beneath the relief of the precious stones, which made the aforesaid ovate border, the craftsman made a crown adorned with all sorts of fruit, preeminently conspicuously with grapes and ears of corn, also dates, apples, olives, pomegranates, and the like. Thus they fashioned the stones in the shape of the aforesaid fruits. in the color appropriate to each type, and then attached them with a golden band around the whole design of the table in profile. After the disposition of the crown, a similar arrangement had been designed to match the scheme of the border, and likewise the rest of the fluting and engraving, because the table had been made for use on both sides, whichever side they began, so that the position of the moldings and of the crown matched the side where the feet were. They made a special metal plate over the whole breadth of the table, 4 fingers deep, so that into it the feet fitted, which had fasteners with holes for attaching under the crown to ensure its use, whichever side they began. This is seen plainly on the outside, the construction being visible on both sides. On the actual table they made an intricate pattern in relief with very costly stones in profusion in the middle, consisting of rubies of many types and emeralds, onyx also, and other kinds conspicuous for their beauty. After the arrangement of the aforesaid patterns, there was superimposed a web with interstices marvelously contrived, which made the central view rhomboid in shape, and on it was put in relief a stone of crystal, and what is called amber, providing the viewers with a sight beyond compare. They made the feet with the capitals adorned with lilies, the lilies opening out underneath the table. The inside parts which could be seen they made with real covering of gold leaf. The support of the foot on the ground was adorned liberally with rubies, having an arrangement of a foot at the front, 8 fingers wide. On it was placed all the stress of the foot. They made a sprouting ivy cluster of stone entwined in anthacus, and surrounded all around with the foot with a vine together with the grape clusters, all fashioned out of stone, as far as the head. The same pattern was applied to the 4 feet. Everything was artistically contrived and introduced uniformly, showing preeminence of experience in art with an emphasis on realism, so that the arrangement of the leaves seemed actually to receive a movement of breath in the air fanning them. Everything was modeled for realistic representation. They made the mouth of the table threefold, of 3 layers as it were, each layer fitted to the other with dovetailing joints through the thickness of the piece of furniture. They made the joints so closely fitting as to be invisible and incapable of detection. The thickness of the whole table was not less than half a cubit, so that the whole piece weighed many talents. For since the king had decided to add nothing to the measurement insofar as greater expenditure was required for making them bigger, he increased the number of talents' weight, and so, in accordance with his purpose, every detail was completed in an extraordinary and remarkable way, unparalleled in craftsmanship and outstanding in beauty. 2 of the drinking bowls were made of solid gold, of overlapping design and relief from the base to the center, with very artistic joining together of the stones in the middle of the layers. There was superimposed an intricate pattern a cubit high, incorporated into the design by intricate work in precious stones, exhibiting meticulous art combined with beauty. On this was fluting intermingled with circular patterns, giving a mesh-like appearance as far as the mouth. On the central part, small bosses of stones, one grouped close to another and of varied types, not less than 4 fingers in size, complemented the conspicuous beauty of the whole. On the brim of the mouth, shapes of lilies with flowers and interwoven clusters of grapes were fashioned all around. Such was the pattern of the golden drinking bowls, holding above 2 large measures. The silver ones had a smooth appearance, being a reflector marvelously adapted for this very effect, so that everything brought near it flashed more clearly than in mirrors. It is not, however, possible to relate the additional details added to give the impression of realism. When it was finished and the pieces put one upon another, that is to say, a silver drinking bowl first, then a gold, then one in silver and one in gold, the overall effect of the sight was entirely beyond description, and even those who approached to see it were unable to tear themselves away from the brilliance and delight in what they saw. The living craftsmanship of the work now made visible was subtly diverse. As people looked at the actual finishing in gold, a certain fascination ensued, coupled with awed amazement, as the attention concentrated on each artistic device in turn. And again, when anyone wanted to gaze at the arrangement of the silver, everything reflected all around. However, one stood and caused even greater amazement among the spectators. so that the manifold artistry of the masterpieces was absolutely indescribable. They engraved the golden goblets with crowns of grapes in the middle, and around the edges they plated in relief a crown of ivy, myrtle, and olive, into which they inserted precious stones. The remaining carvings of the craftsmen finished individually, competing with one another to do everything to the preeminent glory of the king. There was absolutely no work of art comparable in magnificence and craftsmanship, either in the royal treasuries or in any other. The king took no small interest in the work, because of his dedication to works of art. Many a time he laid aside public business and sat attentively among the craftsmen, in order that they might complete the work in a manner consistent with the place for which the entire enterprise was destined. So everything was done in solemnity in a manner worthy of the king, who sent the gifts, and of the high priest who presided over the place. The number of the stones was without limit, and they were great in size, not less than 5,000 in number. Everything was excellent in craftsmanship, so that the gift of the stones and the actual artistic work was worth 5 times more than the gold. I assume that the description of these details was indispensable, so I have narrated it to you. What follows embraces the road to Eleazar that we took. First, I will describe the layout of the whole countryside. When we approached near the site, we saw the city built in the midst of the whole land of the Jews, upon a hill which extended to a great height. On the top of the hill the temple had been constructed, towering above all. There were 3 enclosing walls, over 70 cubits in size, the width being proportionate and the expense which excelled in every respect. It was obvious that the expenditure of money had been restricted upon the door, the fastenings upon it by the doorposts, and the strength of the lintels. The configuration of the veil was, in respects, very similar to the door furnishing, and most of all, in view of continuous movement caused to the material by the undercurrent of the air, it was continuous because the undercurrent started from the bottom and the billowing extended to the rippling at the top, the phenomenon making a pleasant and unforgettable spectacle. The furnishing of the altar was constructed in a manner commensurate with the place and the sacrifices consumed in the fire, and that of the ascent to it likewise. The site had the latter designed in a manner consistent with seemliness for the ministering priests swathed up to the loins in leather garments. The house faces east, and the rear of it faces west. The whole foundation was decked with precious stones and had slopes leading to the appropriate places for carrying the water which is needed for the cleansing of the blood from the sacrifices. Many thousands of animals are brought there in the festival days. There is an uninterrupted supply not only of water, just as if there had been a plentiful spring rising naturally from within, but also of indescribably wonderful underground reservoirs, which, within a radius of 5 stadies from the fountain of the temple, revealed innumerable channels for each of them, the streams joining together on each side. All these were covered with lead down to the foundation of the wall. On top of them, a thick layer of pitch, all done very effectively. There were many mouths at the base, which were completely invisible except for those responsible for the ministry, so that the large amounts of blood which collected from the sacrifices were all cleansed by the downward pressure and momentum. Being personally convinced, I will describe the building plan of the reservoirs just as I understood it. They conducted me more than 5 stadies outside the city, and told me to bend down at a certain spot and listen to the noise at the meeting of the waters. The result was that the size of the conduits became clear to me, as has been demonstrated. The ministering of the priests was absolutely unsurpassable in its vigor, and the arrangement of its well-ordered silence. All work hard of their own accord, with much exertion, and each one looks after his appointed task. Their service is unremitting, sharing the sacrifices, some undertaking the carrying of wood, others oil, others wheaten flour, others the sweet spices, others offering burnt offerings of the parts of the flesh, all of them exerting their strength in different ways. They divide the legs of the bullocks with both hands, though they are more than 2 talents in weight in almost every case, and then with an upward movement rip off with each hand in an amazing way a sufficiently large portion with unerring accuracy. The sheep and the goats are similarly treated in a remarkable way, weight and fat notwithstanding. Those whose concern it is choose in every case spotless specimens outstanding for fatness. Thus, the aforesaid procedure is carried out. They have a rest room set aside, where those who are resting sit down. When this happens, some of those who are rested stand up with alacrity, but no one orders the arrangements of their ministry. A general silence reigns, so that one might think that there was not a single man in the place, although the number of ministers in attendance is more than 700. In addition to a large number of the assistants bringing forward the animals for sacrifice, everything is carried out with reverence and in a manner befitting supreme divinity. It was an occasion of great amazement to us when we saw Eleazar engaged in his ministry, and all the glorious vestments, including the wearing of the garment, with precious stones upon it in which he is vested, golden bells surrounding the hem at his feet, and make a very special sound. Alongside each of them are tassels adorned with flowers and of marvelous colors. He was clad in an outstandingly magnificent girdle, woven with the most beautiful colors. On his breast he wears what is called the oracle, to which are attached 12 stones of different kinds, set in gold, giving the names of the patriarchs, and what was the original order, each stone flashing its own natural distinctive color, quite undescribable. Upon his head he has what is called the tiara, and upon this the imitable mitre, a hallowed diadem having in relief on the front and the middle of the holy letters on a golden leaf the name of God, ineffable in glory. The wearer is considered worthy of such vestments at the services. Their appearance makes one awestruck and dumbfounded. A man would think he had come out of this world and into another one. I emphatically assert that every man who comes near the spectacle of what I have described will experience astonishment and amazement beyond words, his very being transformed by the hallowed arrangement on every single detail. For the inspection of the entire scene, we climbed to the neighboring citadel and viewed it from there. It is situated on a lofty site, fortified with a number of towers, which in their turn are built of sizable stones right up to the top, according to our information, for the protection of the area around the temple, so that in case of any assault or revolt or enemy attack, no one could force his way into the precincts surrounding the house. There were catapults in position upon the towers of the citadel, and a variety of engines. The place dominated the aforementioned precincts. The towers were, so to speak, guarded by most trustworthy sentries who had given distinguished service to their country. They had no permit to leave the citadel except at festivals, and then not as a body. They did not allow a soul to enter. In the case of any order from their commander to admit any visitors to watch, as for example in our case, they observed the order very strictly, very reluctantly admitting us, though only 2 in number and unarmed, to observe the proceedings at the sacrifices. Such a procedure was, they said, confirmed by oath, for every man had sworn that, in the necessary and solemn discharge of the matter according to the oath, they would not admit more than 5 persons at the same time, although they themselves were 500 in number. The citadel, they said, provided the whole protection for the temple, and its founder had in this way secured the advanced protection for the places which we have described. The size of the city is well proportioned, about 40 stadies in circumference, as far as one can estimate. The setting of its towers looks like a theater, and that of thoroughfares too, which stand out, some set lower down, some higher up, and all in the accustomed manner. The same applies to the roads which cross them. Since the city is built on a hill, the layout of the terrain is sloping. There are steps leading to the thoroughfares. Some people make their way above them, others go underneath them, their principal aim being to keep away from the main road for the sake of those who are involved in purification rites, so as not to touch any forbidden object. There was good reason for the building of the city by its pioneers in appropriate harmony, and their plan was a wise one. The terrain was ample and beautiful. Parts were flat, such as the area around Samaria and the neighborhood of Idumea. Other parts were hilly, such as the neighborhood of Judea. Continuous attention to husbandry and the care of the land is necessary to ensure good yield as a result for the inhabitants. When this attention is paid, all farming is accompanied by abundant yield on all the aforesaid land. In such of the cities as achieve large size and its accompanying prosperity, the result is abundance of population and neglect of the land, because everyone is bent on cultural delights, and the whole population in its philosophy is inclined to pleasure. This is what happened with Alexandria, which excelled all cities in size and prosperity. Dwellers from the country migrated to that city and remained there, thus bringing agriculture into decline. So the king, to prevent their settling, gave orders that their stay should not be longer than 20 days. To those also in charge of business matters, he gave written instructions that, should it be necessary to summon anyone to attend, the matter should be dealt with in 5 days. As an indication of the importance he attached to this, he appointed officials and their staff by districts to prevent the farmers and chief men of the city engaging in business, thus diminishing the treasury, that is to say, the profits of farming. We have made this digression because Eleazar has traced out the aforementioned facts for us so well. The zeal of the farmers is indeed remarkable. In fact, their land is thickly covered with large numbers of olive trees and corn crops and pulse, and moreover with vines and abundant honey. As for the fruit trees and date palms which they have, no number can be given. They have many flocks and herds of various kinds, with ample pasture for them. So they perceived clearly that the areas needed to be well populated, and designed the city and the villages accordingly. A large quantity of spices and precious stones and gold is brought to the area by means of the Arabs. The land is agricultural and well fitted for commerce. The city is the home of many crafts, and there is no lack of goods imported from overseas, because of its convenient harbors which supply them, such as Ascalon, Joppa, and Gaza, and also Ptolemais, which the king founded in a central situation in regard to the aforementioned places, not far away from them. The district is well watered everywhere, has everything in abundance, and is very secure. The river Jordan flows around it and never dries up. The land originally measured not less than 60 million acres. Subsequently, neighboring peoples overran it. 600,000 settlers were established upon it, each having 100 acres. As the river rises, like the Nile, in the days approaching harvest, its waters have much of land, discharging its waters into another river in the region of Ptolemais, which in turn flows into the sea. Other torrents, as they are called, also flow down, covering the parts toward Gaza and the district of Azotus. The countryside is surrounded with natural defenses, being difficult to invade and not negotiable for large numbers because of the narrow approaches, with overhanging precipices and deep ravines, and the whole mountainous surroundings of the entire area being very rugged. It used to be said that copper and iron mines were formerly sunk in the neighboring hills of Arabia, but in the time of the Persian supremacy they were abandoned because of the false allegation by the responsible authorities of the time that their working was unprofitable and very expensive. The purpose of closure was also to prevent the resulting ruination of the countryside by the working in the aforesaid mines, and even perhaps its alienation through their tyranny, because they had seized the pretext of moving into the mining areas on account of this allegation, which had been made. I have explained to you in summary form, brother Philocrates, as much as was needful concerning these matters, and we will next expound details of the translation. Eleazar selected men of the highest merit and of excellent education due to the distinction of their parentage. They had not only mastered Jewish literature, but had made a serious study of all the Greeks as well. They were therefore well qualified for the embassy and brought it to fruition as occasion demanded. They had a tremendous natural facility for the negotiations and questions arising from the law, with the middle way as their commendable ideal. They forsook any uncouth and uncultured attitude of mind. In the same way they rose above conceit and contempt of other people, and instead engaged in discourse and listening to and answering each and every one, as is meet and right. They all observed these aims, and went further in wishing to excel each other in them. They were, one and all, worthy of their leader and his outstanding qualities. It was possible to perceive how inseparable was their attachment to Eleazar and his to them. In addition to writing to the king concerning their re-establishment, he urged Andreas to make many active steps to this end, asking him to collaborate to the utmost extent of our ability. We affirmed that we would pay good heed to these matters, to which he replied that he was very apprehensive, because he knew that the king, out of his love of culture, considered it of supreme importance to bring his court any man, wherever he might be found, of outstanding culture and prudence, which excelled his contemporaries. I understand, too, that he made the noble statement that by having at his court men of integrity and wisdom, he would provide the greatest protection for his kingdom. This was the frank advice given him by his friends for his benefit. The point is amply confirmed in the delegates whom he sent. Eleazar also affirmed on oath that he would not permit the men to leave if any other consideration militated against his own personal advantage. He was only dispatching them for the common improvement of all the citizens. This good life, he said, consisted in observing the laws, and this aim was achieved by hearing, and much more than by reading. By these pronouncements, and others similar to them, he clearly showed his attitude toward them. It is worthwhile mentioning briefly his intimations in reply to the questions raised through us. It is my opinion that mankind as a whole shows a certain amount of concern for the parts of their legislation concerning meats and drinks and beasts considered to be unclean. For example, we inquired since there is only one creation only, some things are considered unclean for eating, others for touching, legislation being scrupulous in most matters, but in these especially so. In reply, he began as follows. You observe, he said, the important matter raised by modes of life and relationships, inasmuch as through bad relationships men become perverted and are miserable their whole life long. If, however, they mix with the wise and prudent companions, they rise above ignorance and achieve progress in life. First, our lawgiver gave express commands relating to religious observance and justice, and issued precise sets of instructions about them, not only negatively but positively, together with the manifest damages and the visitations sent by God upon the guilty. Eleazar began first of all by demonstrating that God is one, that his power is shown in everything, every place being filled with his sovereignty, and that none of the things on the earth which men do secretly are hidden from him, but rather that all the deeds of any man are manifest to him, as well as that which is come to pass. So by establishing these matters accurately and setting them out plainly, he demonstrated that even if a man thinks of doing evil, he would not escape, let alone after the deed is done, thus indicating the power of God through the entire legislation. This was his introduction. He proceeded to show that all the rest of mankind, except ourselves, as he said, believe that there are many gods, because men themselves are much more powerful than gods whom they vainly worship. They make images of stone and wood and declare that they are likenesses of those who have made some beneficial discovery for their living, and whom they worship even though the insensibility of the images is close at hand to appreciate. For if the existence of any god depended on the criterion of invention, it would be absolutely foolish, because in that case the inventors would have taken some of the created things and given an added demonstration of their usefulness without themselves being their creators. Therefore it is profitless and useless to deify equals. And yet, even today, there are many of greater inventiveness and learning than the men of old, who nevertheless would be the first to worship them. Those who have invented these fabrications and myths are usually ranked to be the wisest of the Greeks. There is surely no need to mention the rest of the very foolish people, Egyptians and those like them, who have put their confidence in beasts and most of the serpents and monsters, worshipped them and sacrificed to them both while alive and dead. In his wisdom, the legislator, in a comprehensive survey of each particular part, and being endowed by God for the knowledge of universal truths, surrounded us with unbroken palisades and iron walls to prevent our mixing with any of the other peoples in any matter, being thus kept pure in body and soul, preserved from false beliefs, and worshiping the only God omnipotent over all creation. Hence, the leading priests among the Egyptians, conducting many close investigations, and with practical experience of affairs, gave us the title Men of God, which is ascribed exclusively to those who worship the true God, and not to those who are concerned with meat and drink and clothes, their whole attitude to life being concentrated on these concerns. Such concerns are of no account among the people of our race, but throughout the whole of their lives their main objective is concerned with the sovereignty of God. So, to prevent our being perverted by contact with others or by mixing with bad influence, He hedged us in on all sides with strict observances, connected with meat and drink and touch and hearing and sight, after the manner of the law. In general, everything is similarly constituted in regard to natural reasoning, being governed by one supreme power, and in each particular everything has a profound reason for it, both the things which from we abstain in use and those of which we partake. For illustration, I will briefly give you one or two examples. Do not take the contemptible view that Moses enacted this legislation because of an excessive preoccupation with mice and weasels or such like characters. The fact is that everything has been solemnly set in order for unblemished investigation and amendment of life for the sake of righteousness. The birds which we will use are all domesticated and of exceptional cleanliness, their food consisting of wheat and pulse, such birds as pigeons, turtle doves, locusts, partridges, and in addition geese and others of the same kind. As to the birds which are forbidden, you will find wild and carnivorous kinds, and the rest which dominate by their own strength, or who find their food at the expense of the aforementioned domesticated bird, which is an injustice. And not only that, they also seize lambs and kids and outrage human beings, dead or alive, by calling them impure. He has thereby indicated that it is the solemn binding duty of those for whom the legislation has been established to practice righteousness, and not to lord it over anyone in reliance upon their own strength, nor to deprive him of anything, but to govern their lives righteously, in the manner of the gentle creatures among the aforesaid birds, which feed on those plants which grow on the ground, and do not exercise a dominion leading to the destruction of their fellow creatures. By means of creatures like this, the legislator has handed down the lesson to be noted by men of wisdom, that they should be righteous and not achieve anything by brute force, nor lord it over others in reliance upon their own strength. In cases where it is not meet even to touch any of the aforesaid creatures, because of their natural habits with other creatures, surely all possible precautions must be taken to prevent human morals degenerating to their level. Everything pertaining to conduct permitted us toward these creatures and toward beasts has been set out symbolically. Thus, the cloven hoof, that is the separation of the claws of the hoof, is a sign of setting apart each of our actions for good, because the strength of the whole body with its action rests upon the shoulders and the legs. The symbolism conveyed by these things compels us to make a distinction in the performance of all our acts, with righteousness as our aim. This moreover explains why we are distinct from all other men. The majority of other men defile themselves in their relationships, thereby committing a serious offense, and lands and whole cities take pride in it. They not only procure the males, they also defile mothers and daughters. We are quite separated from these practices. The man with whom the aforesaid manner of disposition is concerned is the man on whom the legislator has also stamped that of memory. For example, all cloven-footed creatures and ruminants quite clearly express to those who perceive it the phenomenon of memory. Rumination is nothing but the recalling of the creature's life and constitution, life being usually constituted by nourishment. So we are exhorted through Scripture also by one who says thus, "Thou shalt remember the Lord, who did great and wonderful deeds in thee." When they are really understood, they are manifestly great and glorious. First, there is the construction of the body, the digestion of the food, and the specific function connected with each limb. Much more, the orderly arrangement of the senses, the operation and unseen activity of the mind, and the speed of its reaction to each stimulus and its invention of arts and crafts involves an infinite variety of methods. So he exhorts us to remember how the aforesaid blessings are maintained, and preserved by divine power under his providence. For he has ordained every time and place for a continual reminder of the supreme God and upholder of all. Accordingly, in the matter of meats and drinks, he commands men to offer first fruits, and to consume them there and then straightway. Furthermore, in our clothes he has given us a distinguishing mark as a reminder, and similarly on our gates and doors he has commanded us to set up the words, so as to be a reminder of God. He also strictly commands that the sign shall be worn on our hands, clearly indicating that it is our duty to fulfill every action with justice, having in mind our own condition, and above all the fear of God. He also commands that on going to bed and rising, men should meditate on the ordinances of God, observing not only in word but in understanding the movement and impression which they had when they go to sleep, and waking too. What a divine change there is between them, quite beyond understanding. I have already demonstrated to you the extraordinary nature of the sound reason behind our distinctive characteristic of memory when we expound the cloven hoof and the chewing of the cud. It is no chance accident that it has been ordained as part of our very soul, but is bound up with truth and the expression of the right reason. After prescribing each set of regulations concerning meat and drinks and matters relating to touch, he commands that no act be done nor word be heard to no injustice. The same principle can be found in the case of beasts, because the character of weasels and mice, and all creatures like them, which have been described, is mischievous. Mice pollute and defile everything, not only for their own nourishment, but also to the extent of rendering absolutely useless for human beings everything which comes their way to defile. The species of weasel is unique. Apart from the aforementioned characteristic, it has another polluting feature, that of conceiving through its ears and producing its young.
For this reason, any similar feature in men is unclean. Men who hear anything and give physical expression to it by word of mouth, thus embroiling other people in evil, commit no ordinary act of uncleanliness, and are themselves completely defiled with the taint of impiety. Your king's action in removing such people, for so we are informed, is amply justified. I said, you refer to informers, I suppose, for he systematically imposes upon them punishment and painful death. Indeed, I do refer to them, he replied. Being on the lookout to murder men is unholy. Our law forbids harming anyone in thought or in deed. I have therefore given a brief resume of these matters, indicating further to you that all the regulations have been made with righteousness in mind, and that no ordinances have been made in Scripture without purpose or fancifully, but to the intent that through the whole of our lives we may also practice justice to all mankind in our acts, remembering the all-sovereign God. In the matter of meats, the unclean reptiles, the beasts, the whole underlying rationale is directed toward righteousness and righteous human relationships. In my view, he habitually made out a good case for each separate category. For example, in the case of victims offered, calves, rams, and goats, he stated that it was our duty to take them from our herds and flocks, thus sacrificing domestic animals, but not a wild one, to prevent those who offer sacrifices being conscious in themselves of any excess, seeing that they followed the symbol of their legislator. Thus, the man who offers the sacrifice makes an offering of every facet of his being. Indeed, I consider that on these matters, details of our way of life are worth narrating. Wherefore, in view of your love of learning, I have been induced, Philocrates, to expound to you the solemnity and characteristic outlook of the law. Eleazar offered sacrifice, selected the men, and made ready an abundance of gifts for the king. He then sent us forth on our journey with a large escort. When we reached Alexandria, news of our arrival was given to the king. Andreas and I were introduced to the court. We paid our warm respects to the king and presented the letters from Eleazar. The king was anxious to meet the members of the deputation, so he gave orders to dismiss all the other court officials and to summon these delegates. The unprecedented nature of this step was very clear to all, because it was an established procedure that important bona fide visitors should be granted an audience with the king only 4 days after arrival. while representatives of kings or important cities are rarely admitted to the court within 30 days. However, he deemed the present arrivals to be deserving of greater honor, having regard to the preeminence of him who had sent them. So he dismissed all the officials whom he considered superfluous, and remained walking among the delegates until he had greeted the whole delegation. So they arrived with gifts which had been sent at their hands, and with the fine skins on which the law had been written in letters of gold and Jewish characters. The parchment had been excellently worked, and the joining together of the letters was imperceptible. When the king saw the delegates, he proceeded to ask questions about the books, and when they had shown what had been covered and unrolled in the parchments, he paused for a long time, did obeisance about 7 times, and said, "I offer to you my thanks, gentlemen, and to him who sent you even more, and most of all to the God whose oracles these are." They all, visitors and the court present alike, said together, and with one voice, "It is well, O king." At this the king was moved to tears, so deeply was he filled with joy. Intensity of feeling, coupled with the greatness of the honor received, do force men to tears in the moment of success. The king commanded the parcels to be returned in order, and then immediately greeted the delegates with these words: "It is meet and right, O men of God, to first render homage to the documents for the sake of which I have sent for you, and after that to extend to you the right hand of greeting. This explains my first action. I regard this day of your arrival as of great importance, and it shall be specially marked year by year throughout the time of our life, and for by a happy chance it coincides with our victory at sea against Antigonus. It will therefore be my wish to dine with you this day. Everything of which you partake," he said, "will be served in compliance with your habits. It will be served to me as well as to you." They expressed their pleasure, and the king ordered the finest apartments to be given them near the citadel, and the preparations for the banquet to be made. The chief steward, Nicanor, summoned Dorotheus, who was appointed in charge of these matters, and bade him complete preparations for each guest. "These," he said, "are the king's orders. Some of them you still see now. The number of prominent delegates corresponds to the number of cities, all having the same customs in matters of drink and food and bedding. All preparations were made in accordance with these customs, so that when they came in the presence of the kings they would have a happy visit, with no cause for complaint." This was their experience. Dorotheus, who had the charge of such matters, was a most punctilious man. He arranged all the furniture of which he had charge, all reserved for this type of reception. He set out the couches in 2 lines, in accordance with the royal command, because the king had ordered that half should sit at his right hand, and the rest behind his royal couch, leaving no stone unturned in his desire to do these delegates honor. When they had taken their places, he ordered Dorotheus to carry everything out in accordance with the customs practiced by all his visitors from Judea. So Dorotheus passed over the sacred heralds, the sacrificial ministers, and the rest, whose habitual role was to offer the prayers. Instead, he invited Eleazar, the oldest of the priests, our guests, to offer a prayer. He stood and spoke these memorable words: "May the Almighty God fill you, O king, with all the blessings which he has created, and may he grant you your wife and children and all those of the same mind to enjoy all the blessings without end all the days of your life." At these words from this man, thunderous applause broke out with cries of rapturous joy, lasting a long time. Then they straightway turned to the enjoyment provided by the foods which had been made ready, all the service being carried out through the organization of Dorotheus, including the royal pages and the king's honored guests. When, after an interval, he found an opportunity, the king asked the occupants of the first couch, they were seated according to age, "How can one keep his kingdom without offense to the end?" After a short pause, he replied, "You would administer it best by imitating the eternal goodness of God, by using long-suffering and treatment of those who merit punishment more leniently than they deserve. You will convert them from evil and bring them to repentance." The king commended the answer and asked the next guest, "How should one act in each case?" The reply was, "If he practiced just dealing toward all, he will perform each task well for himself, believing that every thought is manifest to God. Take the fear of God as your guiding principle, and you will not fail in anything." He received him warmly and asked another guest, "How can one make his friends like himself?" He replied, "If your friends saw that you showed intense concern for the people whom you rule, this you will do by observing how God blesses the human race, giving them health and food and all other gifts in their season." He commended him and asked the next guest, "How in his dealings and judgments can one gain the approbation even of those who lose their cases?" The reply was, "If you are fair to all in what you say, and if you take no action arrogantly or in your own strength against wrongdoers, this you will achieve if you have regard to the method of God. For the prayers of the deserving are fulfilled, but those who fail, either through visions or acts, that which is harmful to them is demonstrated. For God does not smite them in proportion to their offenses, nor by the greatness of his strength, but exercises clemency." The king highly approved this also, and asked the next guest, "How then can one be undefeated in the necessities of war?" To which he replied, "If he did not place his confidence in his numbers and his forces, but continually invoked God to direct his enterprises aright, as he dealt justly in everything." He commended this guest also, and asked the next one, "How can one be respected by his enemies?" The reply was, "If in spite of developing his great array of arms and forces, he knew that these things are useless in bringing anything to a lasting conclusion. For God, by granting a truce and thus demonstrating the fear of his power, implants it in every breast." He commended this guest also, and said to the next, "What would be for you the supreme blessing for living?" The reply was, "To know that God is Lord over all, and that we do not ourselves direct our plans in the finest of actions, but God brings to completion the affairs of all men, and guides them with his sovereign power." He acknowledged to this guest also that he spoke well, and asked the next guest, "Supposing one observed all these principles in their entirety, how can one transmit the same attitude to his descendants in the end?" His reply was, "By continual prayer to God that he may receive good designs for what is to be done, and by exhorting his descendants not to be dazzled by fame or by riches. The bestower of these things is God himself, and men do not have excess of anything through their own merits." The king commended these sentiments and inquired of the next guest, "How can one endure with equanimity what happens?" His reply was, "Only if you adopt it as a basic principle that all men have been created by God to share the greatest ills as well as the greatest blessings, and that it is impossible, being a man, to be without some of both. But God, to whom we must pray, gives good courage." He was pleased by this guest too, and said that everyone gave good answers. "I will question yet one more," he said, "after which I will cease for the time being, so that we can turn our attention to enjoying the banquet, and pass the time pleasantly. In the next 6 days following I will learn a little more from the others in turn." Then he asked the next man, "What is the boundary of courage?" The reply was, "If the intent were rightly accomplished as planned in acts involving risk. If your intentions are honorable, O king, everything is brought to pass advantageously for you by God." All the assembled company acclaimed and applauded loudly, and the king said to the philosophers, of whom there were many of them, "I think that these men excel in virtue and have a fuller understanding, because when asked questions of this sort unexpectedly, they give appropriate answers, all making God the basis of their argument." The philosopher Memorandum of Eritrea said, Yes, indeed, O king, for since the whole universe is governed by providence, and on the correct assumption that man is a creature of God, it follows that all power and beauty of argument has its origin in God. The king agreed, and this questioning ceased. They then turned to the enjoyment of the feast, and the banquet came to an end when the evening had come. On the day afterward, the seating and banqueting arrangements were again carried out in the same order. When the king considered it opportune to put some questions to the men, he proceeded to ask the neighbors of those who had answered on the previous day. He began a dialogue with the 11th. On the previous day, 10 had been questioned. When silence reigned, he inquired, "How can one remain rich?" After a short pause, the guest who received the question said, "If he did nothing outrageous or unworthy of his sovereignty, and did not, by his spending, contribute to vain and pointless objectives, while at the same time, by well-doing, attracting the goodwill of his subjects toward him. For the source of blessings to everyone is God himself, who must be followed." The king commended this man and asked the next guest, "How can one maintain the truth?" The answer to this was, "By realizing that the lie brings terrible disgrace upon every man, and much more so upon kings. For if they have the power to do what they wish, what reason would they have for telling lies? It is your duty, O king, to accept this further principle, that God loves the truth." He warmly approved this man also, and looking closely at the next guest said, "What does wisdom teach?" This next guest replied, "Insofar as you do not wish evils to come upon you, but to partake of every blessing, it would be wisdom if you put this into practice with your subjects, including the wrongdoers, and if you admonish the good and the upright also mercifully, for God guides all men in mercy." The king commended him for his answer, and said to the guest after him, "How might one be a friend of man?" He replied, "By observing that the human race increases and is created over many years and in painful suffering, so that it is your duty to neither inflict punishments easily, nor to submit men to torments, knowing that the life of mankind is constituted in pain and punishment. If you bear in mind each set of facts, you will be inclined to mercy, even as God is merciful." The king welcomed this man's answer and inquired of the next guest, "What is the most needful characteristic of kingship?" The reply was, "That the king should keep himself incorruptible, practice moderation throughout all his life, respect justice beyond all else, and cultivate such men as friends, because God himself loves justice." He commended this guest also, and said to his neighbor, "What is the essence of godliness?" He replied, "The realization that God is continually at work in everything, and is omniscient, and that man cannot hide from him an unjust deed or an evil action. For as God does good to the whole world, so you, by imitating him, would be without offense." The king agreed with him and said to the next guest, "What is the definition of kingship?" The reply was, "Real self-mastery, not being carried away by wealth and glamour, nor having as a result an overweening or unworthy ambitions. That would be kingship, if you reasoned well. You have everything you need at hand. God likewise does not want anything, and yet is merciful. You too must think in human terms. Do not desire overmuch, but only what is sufficient for reigning." He complimented him and asked the next guest, "How would one think the finest thoughts?" He replied, "By setting justice before him continually in everything, and thinking that injustice is negation of life, for God always provides for the just the greatest blessings." He commended this guest and said to the next, "How can one sleep undisturbed?" He replied, "You have asked a question on a matter which is difficult to answer, because self-consciousness is impossible in the realm of sleep, and we are confined in this sphere to a sensation which goes beyond the rational. Deep down in us, our experience of the things that happen in sleep is just as if they were actually seen. Nevertheless, we are irrational insofar as we imagine that we are in the sea and in boats, or that we are carried aloft on wings and fly to other places, and other such like things. And we think this is really happening. I have stated this as clearly as I can in every respect. O King, I beg you to lift up your words and actions to reverence for God, so that your conscience may be quite clear that you are following the path of virtue. Do not deliberately show favors unreasonably, nor destroy justice in your exercise of power. For the most part, indeed, the matters which occupy each man in his waking hours are those on which the mind dwells in sleep as well. And God directs a man's every thought and action, awake or asleep, when aimed at the highest goals. Hence the stability which continually surrounds you. The king complimented this guest also, and said to the next one, Since you were the 10th one to answer, we will turn our attention to dinner after this question. So he asked him, How can we avoid doing anything unworthy of ourselves? The reply was, Always have an eye to your glory and prominence, so that you may say and think what is consistent with it, knowing that all your subjects have you in mind and speak of you. You must really be not the least among the actors. They observe the character which they have to portray, and do all their actions consistently with it. Yours, however, is no acting role. You are really a king, God having granted you authority as your manner deserves. The king responded with prolonged, hearty, and genial applause, after which they invited the guests to sleep. When he had finished entertaining them, they turned their attention to the next day's arrangements for the banquet. On the next day the same arrangement was made, and when the king deemed it an appropriate time to ask the guests questions, he asked the first of those left over for subsequent questioning, What is the highest form of sovereignty? He replied, Control of one's self, and not being carried away by one's impulses. He said that it was quite natural for all men to incline their thoughts in one direction or another. The majority are likely to incline toward things to eat and drink and pleasure, but kings toward territorial conquest, depending on the greatness of their standing. And yet, in everyone, moderation is a good thing. What therefore God gives you, take and keep. Do not covet the unattainable. The king was pleased with this reply, and said to the next guest, How can one be free from envy? After a pause, he replied, First of all, by realizing that God assigns glory and greatness of wealth to kings, each and every one, and that no king is independent. All of them wish to share this glory, but they cannot. It is a gift of God. The king gave a long commendation to this guest, and asked the next one, How can one despise his enemies? He replied, By practicing goodwill to all men, and by forming friendships. You would owe no obligation to anyone. To practice goodwill to all men, and to receive a handsome gift from God. This is the highest good. He approved these words, and bade the next guest answer, asking him, How can one maintain the honor he received? The reply was, If by earnestness and favors he showed munificence and liberality towards others, he would never lack honor. Pray God continually that these qualities which I have mentioned may abide with you. He complimented him, and asked the next guest, To whom must a man be generous? It is a man's duty, he replied, to be generous towards those who are amicably disposed to us. That is the general opinion. My belief is that we must also show liberal charity to our opponents, so that in this manner we may convert them to what is proper and fitting to them. You must pray God that these things be brought to pass, for he rules the minds of all. The king consented to these words, and asked the sixth guest to answer. His question was, To whom must one show favor? The answer was, To his parents, always, for God's very great commandment concerns the honor due to parents. Next, and closely connected, he reckons the honor due to friends, calling the friend equal to one's own self. You do well if you bring all men into friendship with yourself. The king commended this guest too, and inquired of the next one, "What deserves to be regarded as beauty?" He replied, "Piety, for this is a preeminent form of beauty. Its dynamic is love, a divine gift which you too have acquired, including in it all blessings." The king applauded him very warmly and said to his neighbor, "How can one, after a false step, recover once more the same glory?" The reply was, "For you a fall is impossible, because you have bestowed on everyone favors which produce goodwill, and this, because it is stronger than the greatest of weapons, produces the greatest security. If, however, some do slip, they must avoid in future the course of action which caused their fall. Win friends and act justly. It is a gift of God to be a doer of good works, and not of the opposite." He was pleased with these words and said to the next guest, "How can one be free from sorrow?" The reply was, "By pursuing righteousness, doing no harm to anyone, and helping everyone. The fruits of righteousness make for freedom from sorrow. You must," he said, "pray God that harm may not come to you from occurrences inconsistent with our conduct. I mean, death, disease, pain, and such like. As for you, God-fearing as you are, none of these evils would befall you." The king praised him generously and asked the 10th guest, "What is the highest form of glory?" His reply was, "Honoring God. This is not done with gifts or sacrifices, but with purity of heart and of devout disposition, as everything is ordained by God and ordered according to His will. This is also your attitude, evidence of which can be seen from all your past and present accomplishments." With a loud voice the king complimented and encouraged them all. The audience raised their voices in approval, and especially the philosophers, for these men far surpassed them in attitudes and eloquence, their starting point being God Himself. After this, the king led way in showing goodwill to them in the toasts. On the following day, the arrangements for the banquet were the same as before, and when it seemed suitable to the king, he began to question the guests next to those who had already replied, and said to the first, "Can practical wisdom be taught?" The reply was, "It is a disposition of the soul, mediated by the power of God, to accept everything of beauty and to reject its opposite." He concurred and proceeded to ask the next guest, "What makes the greatest contribution to health?" He replied, "Self-control, which it is impossible to achieve unless God disposes the heart and mind toward it." The king congratulated this guest and said to the next, "How can one show toward his parents the gratitude which they deserve?" The reply was, "By causing them no pain, which is impossible unless God guides the mind towards the noblest ends." He nodded approval of this man and asked the next guest, "How can one be an attentive listener?" He replied, "By perceiving that all knowledge is of value, so that in the face of events a man can select one of the lessons he has heard, counteract the immediate situation, and so remedy it with the guidance of God. This means that the fulfilling of our deeds comes through him." The king commended this man and said to the next, "How can one avoid doing anything contrary to the law?" To this he replied, "By realizing that God has given to legislators the purpose of saving men's lives, you would follow them." The king approved this guest and said to the next, "What is the value of the family?" He replied, "If we think that we are afflicted by adverse circumstances and suffer as they do, the great strength of the family bond is manifest, and when that trouble is over, glory and success will be ours in the eyes of such folk. For cooperation, when given with good will, is of itself indestructible in the face of everything. With prosperity there is no further need of help, except that you must pray God to bestow every blessing." The king gave him the same welcome as the others, and then asked another guest, "How does fearlessness come about?" He replied, "When the mind is conscious that it has done no evil, for God directs men toward good deliberations on everything." The king approved this man and said to the next, "How can one have the right reasoning at hand?" He replied, By always having an eye to the misfortunes of mankind, knowing that God takes away prosperity from some, while magnifying others and promoting them to receive honor. The king warmly approved this man also, and asked the next guest to answer. How can one avoid having recourse to idleness and pleasures? By having in the forefront of his mind, he said, that he rules a large kingdom and leads many people, and it is his duty not to have his mind centered on anything else but thinking of their care. He should ask God that no part of his duties be lacking. The king commended this man also and asked the 10th guest, how can one recognize those who are acting falsely toward him? The reply to this question was, by observing whether their conduct was generous, and whether their orderly behavior persisted in the greetings and consultations, and the rest of the social life of his companions, and seeing that they do not go beyond the proper limit in their entertainments, and the other features of their conduct. God will direct your mind, O king, to the noblest ends. He applauded them all and congratulated them by name. The company present followed suit, and so they turned to celebrations. On the following day, the king seized the opportunity and asked the next guest, what is the worst type of neglect? To this he replied, if a man were neglectful of children, and did not use every endeavor to bring them up. For we continually pray to God for ourselves, as also for our children, that all blessings may rest upon them. The petition that children may have some discretion is something which comes to pass only by the power of God. The king said that he spoke well, and asked another guest, how can one be a patriot? He replied, by adopting the view that it is a noble thing to live and to die in one's own country. A foreign country produces for the poor contempt, and for the rich disgrace, as for men exiled for crimes. But by doing good to all while you are continually carrying out this policy, you will undoubtedly be a patriot, God giving you favor in the sight of all. He heard this man, and then asked the next guest in order, how can one reach agreement with a woman? By recognizing, he replied, that the female sex is bold, positively active for something which it desires, easily liable to change its mind because of poor reasoning powers, and of naturally weak constitution. It is necessary to have dealings with them in a sound way, avoiding provocation which may lead to a quarrel. Life prospers when the helmsman knows the goal to which he must make the passage. Life is completely steered by invocation of God. The king gave assent to this man, and asked the next guest, how can one be without fault? The reply was, by doing everything with considered judgment, not influenced by misrepresentations, but being your own judge of what is said, and in your judgment directing aright matters concerned with petitions made to you, and through your judgment bringing them to pass. This is how you would be without fault, O king. To have these intentions and to conduct oneself in the light of them is a task involving God's power. He was cheered by what was said, and asked the next guest, how can one avoid anger? To this the reply was, by realizing that he has absolute power, and that any recourse to anger brings death, which is indeed a useless and painful thing to do if many are deprived of life simply because he is Lord. But if all are obedient and there is no opposition, what will be the point of getting angry? You must know that God governs the whole universe with kindliness and without any anger, and you, O king, he said, must follow him. He said that he had given a good answer, and inquired of the next guest, what is sound judgment? Doing everything well, was the reply, with due consultation in your deliberation, taking into account as well the harmful features of the opposite side of the argument, in order that, after paying attention to each detail of our deliberations, may be good and our object achieved. What is most important, by the power of God, your every purpose will be accomplished if you practice piety. The king said that this man also had done well, and asked another guest, what is philosophy? To have a well-reasoned assessment of each occurrence, was the reply, and not to be carried away by impulses, but to study carefully the harmful consequences of the passions, and by exercising proper and necessary restraint in carrying out what the occasion demands. But in order to have due care for these things, it is necessary to serve God. The king applauded this man and asked another guest, "How can one find welcome abroad among strangers?" "By equal treatment to everyone," he replied, "and by appearing inferior rather than superior to those whom he is a stranger. For, in general, God by his very nature welcomes that which is humble, and the human race deals kindly with those in subjection." The king bore witness to these sentiments and asked another, "How will the structure which one builds survive in the future as well?" To this the reply was, "If his accomplishments by his actions are great and glorious, so that those who see them show forbearance because of their beauty, and if he does not neglect a single one of those who carry out such works, and does not compel the rest to complete their part of the business without any payment, by considering how God cares for the human race and providing them with health and discernment and such like, he will himself do something accordingly by paying some compensation for sufferings endured. For the deeds which are of permanent value are those performed out of righteousness." The king said that this man had spoken well, and asked the 10th guest, "What is the fruit of wisdom?" His reply was, "A clear conscience of no evil done, and of living one's life in truth. From these result for you the greatest joy and steadfast self-possession, O mighty king, and good hopes in God as you rule your realm with due reverence." When they heard this, all voiced their approval with loud applause. After this, the king, filled with joy, proceeded to drink to their health. On the next day, the arrangement was the same as before for the details of the banquet, and when an opportunity presented itself, the king began to question the remainder of the guests. To the first he said, "How can a man avoid giving way to arrogance?" The reply was, "By maintaining impartiality, and by reminding himself in the case of each individual that he is a ruler of men and still a man himself. Moreover, God destroys the proud and exalts the gentle and humble." The king commended him and asked the next guest, "Of whom must one avail himself as counselors?" "Those who have won experience in many affairs of state," he said, "and still maintain untarnished their loyalty to him and to all who share his ways. God manifests himself to such qualities as those who deserve it." He congratulated him and asked another guest, "What is the possession most essential for a king?" "The love and affection of his subjects," he replied. "By these means the bond of goodwill is unbreakable. As for the realization of these aims, God fulfills them according to his will." The king commended him and inquired of another guest, "What is the purpose of speaking?" "To persuade your opponent in debate," was his reply, "by pointing out his errors in an orderly list. In this way you will win over your listener, not being antagonistic, but using some commendation to persuade him. And persuasion succeeds through the activity of God." The king said that he had spoken well, and asked the next guest, "In view of the heterogeneous multitudes in the kingdom, how can one be in harmony with them?" "By adopting the role appropriate to each one, with justice as your guiding principle, as indeed is now your practice, God granting you sound reasoning." The king was pleased with this man, and said to the next guest, "At what things ought one to feel pain?" To which he replied, "At the misfortunes of our friends, when we see them long drawn out and incurable. When they are dead and released from evils, reason does not indicate for them any pain. But when human beings attribute to themselves even what is to their advantage, everyone suffers. The escape from every evil takes place only through the power of God." The king declared that this man replied as he ought to have done, and said to the next guest, "How does unpopularity arise?" He replied, "When arrogance and boundless self-confidence are predominant, dishonor ensues and destruction of good reputation. God controls all reputation, directing it where he wishes." He confirmed this man's answer and asked the next guest, "To whom must one entrust himself?" To those who are drawn to you by loyalty, he replied, and not through fear or flattery, with personal gain as their only objective. The former is a sign of affection, the latter of disaffection and expediency. The man whose aim is mere success is a natural traitor. As for you, you have the goodwill of all, as God bestows upon you sound counsels. He declared that this man's answer was wise, and said to another guest, "What preserves a kingdom?" To this the reply was, "Concern and care that no harm shall come upon the multitudes through the officials appointed to serve their needs, which indeed is your policy, God bestowing upon you such noble intent." The king gave this man a word of encouragement and asked another guest, "What maintains favor and respect?" He said, "Virtue, for it accomplishes good works and renounces evil, just as you keep your noble integrity toward all, having this gift from God." The king gave this man a favorable reception, and asked the 11th guest, there being 2 over the 70, "How can one be peacefully disposed at heart even in war?" The answer was, "By the knowledge that no evil has been committed upon any of your subjects, and that all are fighting for blessings received, knowing that even if they give their lives, you will take care of their property. You do not cease helping everyone, for God has given you the gift of kindliness." The king applauded them all heartily and greeted them with acclamation, drank the health of each one, and turned his attention to enjoying the feast, mingling among the guests with geniality and great delight. On the 7th day, after much preparation, and amid the additional company of many others from the cities, for there was a large number of delegates, the king, at a suitable opportunity, asked the first of those who had not yet been questioned, "How can one avoid being deceived?" The reply was, "By investigating the speaker, his speech, and the subject of it, and by making the same inquiries over a longer period by other means. The possession of an acute mind is the ability to discern everything. That is an excellent gift from God, which indeed you possess, O king." The king heartily applauded, and asked the next man, "Why does not the majority of human beings recognize virtue?" "Because all men," he said, "have become naturally intemperate and inclined to pleasures, as a result of which injustice came about, and the mass of greed. The virtuous disposition, on the other hand, restrains those who are attracted to the rule of pleasure, and commands them to respect self-control and justice more highly. God directs all these matters." The king affirmed that this man had given a good answer, and asked the next guest, "Whose guidance must kings follow?" The answer was, "The laws, so that by practicing justice they may improve the life of men. In the same way that you by doing this have established an everlasting memory of yourself, following the commandments of God." He said that this man also gave a good answer, and asked the next guest, "Whom ought one to appoint as chief ministers?" He replied, "Men who hate wickedness, and in imitation of his way of life do justice, so as to earn themselves good repute continually, just as you, O mighty king," he said, "achieve this aim, God having granted you a crown of righteousness." He loudly approved of him, looked toward the next guest, and said, "Whom must one appoint as commanders of his forces?" He replied, "Men of outstanding bravery and justice, who prefer saving men's lives to victory at the reckless risk of lives. As God showers blessings upon all, you too, in imitation of him, are a benefactor to your subjects." The king said that they had given a good answer, and asked another guest, "What man deserves admiration?" The reply was, "The man endowed with glory and wealth and power, who deep at heart is the equal of everyone, just as you by your conduct deserve admiration, God giving you the gift of caring for these things." The king commended this man also, and said to the next guest, "On what matters ought kings to spend most of their time?" He said, "Time should be spent on reading and on the accounts of travels, which have been written and dedicated to thrones for the permanent betterment of mankind. This indeed you do, thereby winning glory beyond the reach of others, with God fulfilling your plans."
The king warmly commended this man also, and asked another guest, "What must be one's conduct in relaxation and leisure?" The reply was, "Be a spectator of entertainments which exercise restraint, and keep before your eyes things in life done with decency and moderation. That is suitable and appropriate to life. There is indeed a therapeutic value in these things, for often even from the smallest items something worthwhile stands out. You are well versed in all restraint, and show love of wisdom in your activities, receiving your reward from God because of your moral goodness." The king was well pleased with what had just been said, and addressed the ninth guest. "How ought one to conduct himself at banquets?" The reply was, "By inviting men of learning, with the ability to remind him of matters advantageous to the kingdom and to the lives of the subjects. Better harmony or music than these you would never find, because these men are beloved of God, having trained their minds for the noblest of ends. This is your practice also, all your plans being directed aright by God." He was delighted at these words, and inquired of the next guest, "What is thought finer by the multitude, to have a king set over them who was once a commoner, or a king of royal blood?" He replied, "The alternative which is by nature best. Some kings of royal birth show themselves hard and cruel in their subjects, and much worse, some kings of common origin, with their experience of misfortune and their share of poverty, when given rule over people, have turned out to be much more harsh than the foulest tyrants. But, as I said before, a noble character which has had its share of suitable education is capable of ruling, just as you, O mighty king, and are distinguished not so much by the outstanding glory and wealth of your kingdom, but because you excel all men in your moderation and humanity, God having endowed you with these gifts." The king congratulated this man also with long applause, and asked the last guest of all, "What is the most important feature in a kingdom?" To this he replied, "To establish the subjects continually at peace, and guarantee that they obtain justice quickly in verdicts. The sovereign brings about these aims when he hates evil and loves good, and holds in high esteem the saving of human life. In the same way that you consider injustice the greatest evil, and by your just government in all things have won glory for yourself, which is imperishable, God granting you to have a pure mind untainted." When he had finished speaking, there was a long burst of applause, accompanied by delighted cheers. When it subsided, the king took a cup and drank a toast to all the assembled company, and to the speeches which they had made. He addressed them all thus: "The greatest benefits have fallen on me through your visit. I have been assisted a great deal by your giving me essential teaching on kingship." He commanded that 3 talents of silver should be given to each one, together with a slave who would hand it over to him. All joined in acclamation. The guests were filled with rejoicing, and the king turned his attention to festivities unreservedly. "If I have dwelt at length on these matters, Philocrates, I beg your pardon. I admired these men tremendously, in the way in which they give immediate answers which needed a long time to ponder. And while the questioner had thought out details in each case, those answering gave their replies immediately, one after another. They were manifestly deserving of admiration to me and to the audience, but especially to the philosophers. All who will inherit this narrative will, I think, find it incredible. To tell lies concerning matters which are being chronicled is inappropriate. If I were to make a single error, it would be impious in these matters. On the contrary, we narrate things as they happened, eschewing any error. I therefore, heartily accepting the force of their argument, have tried to present from the records the details of events at the audiences with the king and at the banquets. It is, as you know, the custom that from the beginning of the king's audiences until he retires to bed, a record be made of everything said and done. This is an excellent and worthwhile procedure, because on the next day before the day's business begins, all that was done and spoken is read out, and if any action needs it, it is corrected. So this whole account we have produced by accurate reference to the records. As I have said, knowing your keen desire to learn what is of value. 3 days afterward, Demetrius took the men with him,
traversed the mile-long jetty into the sea toward the island, crossed the bridge, and went in the direction of the north. There he assembled them in a house which had been duly furnished near the shore, a magnificent building in a very quiet situation, and invited the men to carry out the work of translation, all that they would require being handsomely provided. They set to completing their several tasks, reaching agreement among themselves on each by comparing versions. The result of their agreement thus was made into a fair copy by Demetrius. The business of their meeting occupied them until the 9th hour, after which they were free for bodily rest and relaxation, everything which they desired being furnished on a lavish scale. Apart from all this, Aristeas also provided for them all that was prepared for the king. This was the order which he had received from the king. At the first hour of the day they attended the court daily, and after offering salutations to the king, retired to their own quarters. Following the custom of all the Jews, they washed their hands in the sea in the course of their prayers to God, and then proceeded to the reading and explication of each point. I asked this question: what is their purpose in washing their hands while saying their prayers? They explained that it is evidence that they have done no evil, for all activity takes place by means of the hands. Thus, they nobly and piously refer everything to righteousness and truth. In this way, as we said previously, each day they assembled in their quarters, which were pleasantly situated for quiet and light, and proceeded to fulfill their prescribed task. The outcome was such that in 72 days the business of translation was completed, just as if a result was achieved by some deliberate design. When it was completed, Demetrius assembled the company of the Jews in a place where the task of translation had been finished, and read it to all, in the presence of the translators, who received a great ovation from the crowded audience for being responsible for great blessings. Likewise also they gave an ovation to Demetrius and asked him, now that he had transcribed the whole law, and gave a copy to their leaders. As the books were read, the priests stood up, with the elders from among the translators and from the representatives of the community, and with the leaders of the people, and said, since this version has been made rightly and reverently, and in every respect accurately, it is good that this should remain exactly so, and that there should be no revision. There was general approval of what they said, and they commanded that a curse should be laid, as was their custom, on anyone who should alter the version by any addition or change to any part of the written text, or any deletion either. This was a good step taken, to ensure that the words were preserved completely and permanently in perpetuity. When the king received messages about these events, he rejoiced greatly, because it seemed that the purpose which he shared had been safely accomplished. All of the version was read by him, and he marveled profoundly at the genius of the lawgiver. He said to Demetrius, how is it that after such great works were originally completed, none of the historians or poets took it upon himself to refer to them? He said, because the legislation was holy and had come from God, and indeed some of those who made the attempt were smitten by God, and refrained from their design. Moreover, he said that he had heard Theopompus declare that, just when he was about to quote in a misleading way some of the previously translated pages from the law, he had a mental upset for more than 30 days. At its abatement, he besought God to make clear to him the cause of this occurrence. It was revealed to him in a dream that it was due to his meddlesome desire to disclose the things of God to common man. And then he said, he ceased and so recovered. I have also received from Theodictus, the tragic poet, the report that when he was about to include in a play a passage from what was written in the Bible, he was afflicted with cataract of the eyes. He suspected that this was why the affliction had befallen him, so he besought God for many days and recovered. When the king had received, as I previously mentioned, Demetrius's account on these matters, he bowed and gave orders for great care to be taken of the books, and for their hallowed preservation. He invited the translators to visit him often after their return to Judea. It was, he said, only fair for their departure to take place, but when they returned he would, as was right, treat them as friends, and they would receive the most liberal hospitality at his hands.
He ordered preparations to be made for their departure, and treated the men magnificently, presenting to each one 3 robes of the finest materials, 2 talents of gold, a cup worth of talent, and a complete furnishing for a dining room. He also sent to Eleazar, along with their luggage, 10 silver-footed couches, with all accessories to go with him, a cup worth 30 talents, 10 robes, purple cloth, a magnificent crown, 100 lengths of finest linen, vessels, bowls, and 2 golden goblets for a dedication. He also wrote with an invitation that if any of the men desired to return to him, there would be no impediment, because he attached great importance to the company of men of culture, and invested his wealth liberally in such men, and not in useless expenditure. There you have, Philocrates, as I promised, my narrative. These matters, I think, delight you more than the books of the mythologists, for your inclination lies in the direction of concern for things that benefit the mind,